In this video, I'm going to show you a simple two-box method which will allow you to quickly achieve correctly proportioned animals. Hi everyone, I'm Mike and this is the Sunday Art Show. So the techniques that I'm about to show you were inspired by a workshop that I ran with Exmouth Art Group the other week, and they will work if you use them on live animals. But obviously, as you're about to see, this workshop was run indoors and I can't have a live cow in the hotel ballroom. So I'm going to be working from a photograph. So this is the reference photo I was using on the day. And the cow that I was painting was this central cow here. And I just wanted to show you some of the measuring techniques that I use. And these aren't my measuring techniques, these are long established. But I thought it might be helpful to show you in detail the way that I go about measuring the proportions of an animal. And this is something that we did in a lot of detail on the day. So I'll just cover the main points here now. So what you do is you hold your brush out with a completely straight arm. Okay, so that's really important. Your arm must remain completely straight throughout the entire measuring process. Now, in fact, I tend to use my right hand because you'll find out why later, but I tend to use the hand that I don't paint with. So if you're right-handed, if you normally paint with your right hand, I would recommend doing this with your left hand. So you can see that holding my arm out in front of me and holding the handle of the brush vertical, then what I can do is I can line up my thumb here so that it's level with the foot of the cow. And then by sliding my thumb up and down the handle like that, I can adjust the position of my thumb so that when my thumb tip is lined up with the bottom of the cow's leg, the end of the brush handle is lined up with the top of his head. Okay, so that's my first measurement. Now, having done that, it's essential, absolutely vital, that you keep your arm completely straight and keep your thumb completely fixed on the handle. And while doing both of those things, you rotate the brush 90 degrees, and then I line my thumb up with the point on the animal which is as far to the right as possible. So in this case, it's the tip of the right ear. And you can see that if I do that, then the end of the brush ends up roughly where the back end of the animal would be. Now, it's a little bit difficult to see because obviously the rear end of the cow I'm looking at is partially obscured by the butt of that black cow. But very roughly speaking, the height of the animal from hoof to head, and then from tip of the ear to back end, they're roughly equal. Okay, so that means this animal, viewed from this perspective, will fit into a square box. So that's the first thing that I draw on my paper. Now we've made measurement of our first square, the first thing I do is place a mark on the paper to position the top right-hand corner of that square. Now I think to myself, okay, how big do I want the cow to be? So I want the cow to come down to around about here. So I'll put a second dot there, directly below the first one. The idea being that my cow will be about this tall on the page. Next I take my spare paintbrush, I place the tip of the handle on the first dot, and I place my thumb in line with the second dot. And then I must keep the position of my thumb fixed. And then I rotate the brush, I just move the mouse out of the way a little bit there, and put a mark where the end of the handle is. I move the brush again, but this time my thumb is in line with the second mark. So I place a fourth mark in line with the end of the brush. Now, before I draw the sides of the square, I just double check my measurements. So there's the length of between the first two dots. That works well. That looks right. And that looks right. So now, just freehand, no need to use a ruler. We just very roughly connect the dots. And it doesn't matter if you make a couple of mistakes. The point is, you've got a reasonably well proportioned square. Having drawn our square onto the paper, what we can do now is see how the head of the animal fits into that big square. So once again, I take my non-drawing hand, hold my brush, but this time I align the end of the brush with the top of the animal's head, as before, but my thumb is lined up, you can see there, with the bottom of the animal's mouth, the jaw, bottom of the jaw there. Once again, keeping my arm dead straight, keeping my thumb in fixed position, I rotate my arm so the brush is horizontal, and you can see that the distance between brush tip and thumb tip is about ear tip to ear tip on the cow. So very roughly, the head of the cow will fit in to another square. But before we go back to the drawing, we need to check how big this new square is compared to the larger one. So what we do is, again, I haven't moved my thumb at all. There's my measurement of the head. And now keeping that fixed, I moved the brush tip down to the bottom of the head. And you can see I've got another square there. And then, so it's very roughly 2.5 animal heads to the height of the cow. Because these are just approximations at the moment. The point is we can now add a second square to our drawing. So let's do that now. So we know from our measurements that our second square needs to fit in to the length of our first square 2.5 times. So the best way to achieve this is simply by experiment. So I place my thumb a distance from the end of my brush handle, and I place my brush handle on the corner of the square. Now I put my finger where my thumb is, and I move the brush down, keeping the thumb of my right hand fixed. And I can see that there's no way I'm going to fit in 2.5 of these into here. So what I do now is I shorten the distance between the brush handle and my thumb, and I try again. So 1, 2, nearly 3. So that's now too short. So now I come down here a bit. I've slightly increased this distance. And I go 1, 2, and a half, roughly 2.5. So I didn't get it exactly right, but it's good enough for a first approximation. So keeping my thumb and finger fixed on the handle of the brush, now I place the end of the brush here again, and I mark where my thumb hits the side of the square. Keeping my right hand fixed, I now rotate the brush again, and I do the same here. So now I know that my cow's head will very roughly fit into a square of this size. So now we're ready to start sketching in the actual lines of the cow. Now I'm changing colour here, mainly so that you can see what I'm doing more clearly, but I actually do use this technique quite often because I just find it's easier for me to see what I'm doing as well. So we've just established that the head of the cow needs to fit roughly into this square. So I'm now looking back at my reference photo, and I know I've got to get both the width of the head and the width of the ears into that box, roughly. Now, as you can see, I've just gone outside of the box. That's okay. We don't want to trust our first measurement too much. It's simply a guideline. In fact, I would go as far to say that the first measurement you make is almost certainly going to be wrong in some way. But that's okay. You know, that's what we want. You almost want to be thankful for being wrong, because once you spot that you've made a mistake, then you can correct it. So having put the head in, I now look at the back. And on second look at the cow, I can see that the back isn't dead straight or dead flat, dead horizontal like the square here. It actually goes uphill. So I'm going to go outside the box now and put in the line of the back. Again, fairly roughly, just a first approximation. And then there's kind of a wiggly line that goes down there, down the centre of the chest. when we draw the legs, it's a useful tip to think of the legs in distinct sections. So there's the upper leg, there's a knobbly knee, there's the lower leg, which tends to flare out quite a bit on a cow, and then there's the hoof. Now I come across, and there's also a line down the body here. Again, think of the legs in distinct sections. Knobbly knee. And then the rear leg of the cow. On the day of the workshop, because I had the computer so far away from me, I wasn't able to see this third leg particularly clearly. So I just modelled it all as one mass. But I can now see that it's peeking it out from behind the foreleg. I can put the belly in. The tail comes down here. Then the rear leg. Same technique as for the others. There's a bit of a dent here in the back. And then I can just approximate this line because that's the line that's hidden by the black cow. So you can see I've ignored my lines of the boxes in certain places, but the two boxes that I drew in initially have really helped me to get the proportions of the cow correct fairly quickly. Now, having done this, I can now look at my drawing and say, is it correct? And in fact, I think the head of the cow needs to be a little bit bigger. So I'm going to fix that now. So once again, I've changed colours, and I'm going to refine the shape of the cow's head a little bit. So I think the head of the cow actually needs to be just a little bit bigger, more in line with the first measurement I made for the small box. And in fact, the ears, though, now need to be a little bit of a different shape. And so that's a bit better than I had before. So when I'm measuring proportions or sketching, it's very much an iterative process. Now, I'm definitely not claiming full credit, but you can see looking around the workshop, we've got a lot of different animals painted in different styles, but everyone used this simple technique, and on the whole, the animals came out very well proportioned. So here are my top tips for measuring animals. Imagine the whole animal has to fit into a box. Now, this box won't always be a square, sometimes it will be a rectangle, but the important thing, which leads us on to point 2, is to measure how the height of the animal compares to its width, and that's going to allow you to draw or paint a well-proportioned box. Next, you do the same for the head of the animal, and that will allow you to draw a second box for the head, but you have to take care to position this second box in the correct location within the first. And you can use the same measuring technique to achieve this. You can see how I did that earlier in the video. Don't treat your measurements as the absolute truth. You can always improve them. So the whole idea is to make a judgment and then look back at that measurement, your first measurement, and think, does this need to be improved? And if it does, that's absolutely fine. Maybe you need to adjust it 4 or 5 times. The point is to keep looking and keep measuring. And that leads us on to the final point. You can do this measurement technique at any stage of your painting, not just at the start. So even if you're almost finished and you think, oh, something doesn't look right, it's worth double checking your measurements. Okay, so those are my top tips for getting the proportions of animals correct. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you next Sunday for the next episode of The Sunday Art Show. Thank you very much for watching.